When I saw my sister standing in my living room with him, I felt something break inside me. Those were the first thoughts that ran through my mind as the room blurred around me. The antiseptic smell of the hospital still clung faintly to my clothes, and the ache in my side reminded me that I had just come through surgery, a routine procedure that I thought would be uneventful. I had pictured myself returning home, settling back into my quiet life, maybe finally resting in the comfort of my own home, but instead, the scene before me felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I stood in the doorway, clutching my cardigan tightly around my shoulders, trying to process the surreal tableau. My husband, David, who had been quietly distant for weeks, was laughing, really laughing, with my sister, Clara. Not the polite, reserved chuckle you share at a family dinner. No, this was an easy, intimate laugh, the kind that belongs to people who share secrets behind someone else's back. My heart thumped painfully in my chest. I wanted to call it a dream, to step back and rub my eyes, but the scent of my sister's perfume and the warmth of the sunlight hitting the sofa where they leaned together said otherwise. This was real. It was happening. I should have turned away. I should have walked back to my car, called the hospital, called anyone. But I couldn't. My body felt like it had turned to stone. The room spun slightly, and I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling the residual soreness from surgery as if it anchored me to reality in the cruelest way. And then I saw it, the papers on the coffee table, my name in the corner, signatures I didn't recognize, the legal mark that confirmed what my mind refused to fully acknowledge yet. The house. My house. My sanctuary. Sold. Without me. Signed, sealed, and delivered while I had been lying in a hospital bed, trusting the man I had loved for over 15 years. I don't even remember moving into the living room. One moment I was frozen in the doorway, the next I was stepping closer, the worn carpet soft under my feet, my hands trembling as I picked up the documents. My eyes scanned the signatures, my own nowhere to be found. How? I whispered, my voice barely audible. My sister noticed me then. Clara's smile faltered, but only for a fraction of a second, long enough for me to see the guilt flash there and disappear beneath a mask of calm. "Welcome home," she said, her tone light, but the words landed like stones in my chest. "I've been hoping we could talk, about his and my plans." Plans? My husband. My sister. The sentence should have made no sense at all, yet every syllable pressed down on me with unbearable weight. I felt my stomach twist, bile rising. I could barely breathe. This was my life, my family, my home, and it was unraveling around me, faster than I could think, faster than I could speak. David finally looked up from the papers, his expression carefully neutral, though the slight twitch of his jaw betrayed him. I didn't want you to find out this way," he murmured, avoiding my gaze. My hands gripped the table harder, nails digging into the wood. "Find out, what? That you sold my home behind my back? That you were planning this with Clara? Or that you thought I wouldn't notice?" My voice cracked. Pain and disbelief coiled around every word. He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. Clara stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "It's not what you think," she said. And just like that, my blood boiled. Not because of the denial, my mind could handle denial, but because of the casual way she spoke, the way she moved as if this were a minor inconvenience rather than the destruction of someone's life. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw her apology hidden behind the bravado, a tiny tremor that almost made me hesitate. Almost. But I didn't. I stepped closer, my voice shaking but firm. "Explain it. Both of you. Now." The words were more demand than question, more accusation than plea. David swallowed and ran a hand down his face. The paper crumpled slightly under his fingers. It started months ago," he said finally, voice low. "Clara and we fell in love. I never meant for it to happen. I thought we could handle it privately, somehow." My hands fell to my sides. My chest ached, tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. "Privately?" You sold my house privately? While I was recovering from surgery? I laughed, though it was bitter and hollow. My voice echoed off the walls I had once called mine. Clara looked at me, eyes wide, lips trembling. I didn't want to hurt you, she whispered. The betrayal stabbed deeper than the surgery ever could. She didn't want to hurt me, yet here she was, standing in my living room with my husband, holding the papers that proved every word of her intent. Her dying wish, David murmured suddenly. Mom, she asked us to take care of each other. That's what she wanted. My mother's dying wish. I swallowed hard, memories flooding back, the hospital room, the day she had handed me her final letter, weak hands pressing it into mine. I had assumed it was a note of love, a final blessing. Instead, it had been the seed of this betrayal. I sank into the sofa, feeling the familiar cushion swallow me, my hands clutching the letter. My mother's shaky script stared back at me. Promise me you'll forgive, even if it breaks your heart. He deserves happiness. Her words had been meant to guide me through life, to instill compassion, but they had been twisted into justification. My sister had used my mother's voice to cloak her own desire and righteousness. The room blurred, the sound of their breathing, the light filtering through the blinds, even the hum of the refrigerator, all of it pressed in on me. I felt hollow, betrayed, shattered in ways I hadn't known were possible. I thought of the years we had built together, the laughter, the shared cups of coffee, the quiet evenings in front of the television. And now, all of it felt like a lie. My body ached, not from the surgery, but from the weight of reality pressing down on me. The people I had trusted most, the blood I had loved, had turned against me in ways so intimate it left no space to hide from the truth. I don't remember exactly when I stood up, the letter still clutched in one hand, my vision blurred from tears. But I did. I walked over to the window, looking out at the street I had once walked proudly, the mailbox I had painted myself, the garden I had tended lovingly. It wasn't mine anymore. They had taken it from me, not just the house, but the life I thought I had. And yet, somewhere deep in the ache, a small, defiant spark remained. This wasn't the end. I wouldn't let it be. Not completely. The days that followed were a blur of hospital calls, lawyer meetings, and the hollow echo of my once busy home. I stayed with a friend for a while, the smell of her kitchen, the hum of her television, and the softness of her couch comforting in a way that my own house no longer could. Yet, even there, I couldn't escape the images, David and Clara laughing, the papers with my name nowhere to be found, my mother's dying wish twisted into a weapon against me. I tried to make sense of it all. How had I missed the signs? The late-night phone calls, the whispers I thought were work-related, the little absences that now looked so deliberate in hindsight. I kept replaying the moments in my mind, searching for the tiny cracks in the facade that I had ignored because I didn't want to see them. And maybe that was the cruelest part, that I had been so blind, so willing to believe in the life we had built, that the betrayal had room to grow unnoticed right under my nose. I spoke to David once over the phone. His voice was careful, tentative, as if speaking too firmly would shatter him. I know you're angry, he said. I never wanted it to get this far. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that what he wanted no longer mattered. But instead, I pressed the phone to my chest and listened to the emptiness on the other side. You made your choice, I said quietly. You chose her over me, over our life, over everything we promised each other. And then I hung up. I couldn't stand to hear him make excuses, to hear his voice when every word he said dripped with betrayal. Clara reached out too. I remember the first message, short, trembling, almost pleading. I didn't want to hurt you. Mom asked me to. I just followed her wish. I read it over and over, the words making my stomach churn. Following my mother's dying wish? That had been the knife in the back I hadn't expected. It wasn't just infidelity, it was manipulation, and it had been masked with love and duty. The audacity of it nearly made me laugh through my tears, if I hadn't felt so hollow. I started going through the house, my house, one final time. Each room was a tomb of memories, the living room with the faded curtains David had picked, the kitchen where I had spent countless mornings making breakfast for us, the garden that still smelled faintly of roses from the spring. Everything felt foreign now, like a museum of someone else's life. I picked up a mug, traced the chip on its edge with my finger, and felt a pang of grief for the normalcy I had lost. I had always been someone who cherished small details, the subtle markers of home, and now even these had been stolen. It was during these moments of quiet reflection that I began to notice the subtler betrayals, the hidden lies, the silences that had grown between us. David had never been cruel, never had yelled or thrown things, but the absence of honesty, the small deceptions piled one upon another, had created a canyon I hadn't even realized existed. And Clara, my sister, she had exploited that quietly, patiently, until the moment she could step in without fear of resistance. The depth of that realization hurt more than the initial shock. It wasn't just what they had done, it was the truth that I hadn't seen it coming that made the betrayal so absolute. One afternoon, I found myself walking down to the little cafe around the corner, trying to breathe outside the suffocating confines of grief. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain, the drizzle from the morning washing over the street, the scent of wet pavement mingling with baked pastries. I sat by the window, watching couples stroll past, families laughing together, and I felt the pinch of loneliness keenly. But amidst that sorrow, a quiet determination began to take root. This wasn't the end of my story. The house, the betrayal, the manipulation, those were chapters that could no longer define me. I had to find a way to reclaim myself, piece by piece. Day by day. I began journaling, something I hadn't done in years. My hand shook at first, the pen clumsy as it tried to translate the whirlwind of emotions into words. Shock, anger, grief, disbelief, all of it poured onto the pages. But slowly, as the words took shape, I felt a strange relief. Naming the betrayal, putting it down in ink, made it tangible and, paradoxically, manageable. I could see it, face it, and perhaps, eventually, rise above it. It wasn't easy. Every memory that resurfaced carried its own sting, the way David had kissed me before work, the way Clara had confided in me about trivial frustrations, the mundane routines that now seemed like cruel mockery. Yet, in the quiet moments of reflection, I realized that their happiness, built on deception, was fragile. And my own, though shattered, was still mine to rebuild. That thought, small as it was, gave me a spark of strength I hadn't felt in weeks. One night, I dreamt of my mother. She stood in the garden, sunlight streaming through the trees, her expression soft but firm. "Forgive, but do not let them take your spirit," she said, her voice gentle but unwavering. I woke with tears on my pillow, heart heavy but determined. Forgiveness didn't mean erasing the betrayal, and it didn't mean letting them continue unchallenged. It meant acknowledging the truth, honoring my own worth, and finding a way forward that preserved my dignity. And that, I realized, was the first step toward reclaiming my life. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The sound of the dial tone in my quiet apartment felt almost comforting, a tangible action in a life that had spun so wildly out of control. I explained everything, the house, the signatures, the manipulation, my sister, my husband. The lawyer listened patiently, asking the right questions, jotting notes, promising that there was a way to untangle the mess. I felt a flicker of hope, small, fragile, but real. For the first time in weeks, I realized I could take back some control. Still, the process was grueling. Every conversation, every meeting, forced me to revisit the betrayal in excruciating detail. I reviewed the legal documents, compared dates, read emails, and messages I hadn't noticed before. I discovered the subtle planning. David and Clara had timed the sale while I was recovering, consulted each other over weeks, and even involved a family friend to handle the signing discreetly. Each revelation was a knife, twisting deeper, yet also building my resolve. I had to be methodical. I had to be strong. Rage alone would not reclaim what was lost, strategy and clarity would. During this time, Clara reached out again. I ignored her first few messages. The impulse to scream at her, to lash out, was almost overwhelming. But I realized that giving her the satisfaction of my immediate reaction would only make her feel victorious. Instead, I crafted my words carefully, a single message, short and neutral. Do not contact me again until this is resolved legally. It was cold, but necessary. I needed space, not just from her, but from the whirlwind of emotions she represented. David tried calling after that. I let it ring until voicemail, then deleted the message. I didn't need his explanations, I needed my life back. The anger had transformed into something quieter but more potent, clarity. I understood now that he had chosen them over me, and no amount of pleading, no tearful apologies, could undo that choice. I had to forge a path forward without them. Weeks passed. I became obsessed with detail, ensuring no loose ends could be exploited against me. I reviewed contracts, consulted experts, and even hired a private investigator, not to spy, but to document everything thoroughly. Every signature, every interaction, every subtle deception became a brick in the foundation of my case. And while this work was draining, it also empowered me. I was no longer the passive victim lying in a hospital bed. I was a woman taking back her life, step by step, document by document. The turning point came unexpectedly. One afternoon, I received a call from a neighbor, someone I had known for years but had lost touch with amid the chaos. She spoke cautiously, almost apologetically. I didn't know how else to reach you. David and Clara, they've been telling people you approved the sale, it's spreading, and people are upset. My stomach lurched, but only for a moment. Then something settled in me, the truth, no matter how carefully they had tried to manipulate it, could be revealed. And it would. I felt a quiet determination, sharper than any anger I had known. I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. Not dramatic, not shouting or public humiliation, but factual, firm, and undeniable. I arranged to meet David first. The air was cool, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the park where we met, a neutral space, safe, controlled. He tried the same excuses, the same half-apologies. I listened, letting him speak, letting him spill his guilt. Then I spoke, calmly, deliberately, outlining what I knew, what I had documented, and the legal consequences awaiting him. His face shifted from defensiveness to fear, then resignation. For the first time, I saw him as someone small and mortal, not the partner I had once trusted implicitly. Then came Clara. The meeting was harder, in part because of my own history with her. She had been my sister, my confidant, someone I had loved unconditionally. Yet she had weaponized that love against me. I spoke plainly, you used Mom's dying wish to justify your actions. You betrayed me. You sold my home. And you thought you could manipulate the truth. That ends now. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply stated facts, the calm weight of evidence pressing down. Her face paled. I could see the tiny flickers of regret, or perhaps fear, but it didn't matter. I had no desire for revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted my life back. Within days, the legal consequences began to unfold. Friends, neighbors, and even extended family learned the truth, not through gossip or rumor, but through the carefully documented evidence I had compiled. David faced social and financial repercussions. Clara was confronted with the ethical and legal consequences of her actions. The house, the symbol of betrayal and loss, became a public testament to accountability. Watching the wheels turn, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that truth had prevailed, sorrow that trust had been shattered beyond repair. Through it all, I discovered something unexpected: resilience. The betrayal had stripped me bare, but in that rawness, I found strength I hadn't known existed. I began to reconnect with friends I had neglected, to invest in hobbies that grounded me, to walk through my days with a quiet confidence. I realized that happiness, though fractured, could be rebuilt. Not by ignoring the pain, but by acknowledging it, honoring it, and moving forward with intention. Even as the legal proceedings and social reckonings unfolded, the emotional work was just beginning. Every morning, I woke to an emptiness that no paperwork could fill. The bed felt too large, the coffee cup too small, and the silence of my apartment pressed against me like a weight. I spent hours walking through the nearby park, letting the wind tug at my hair, listening to birds I hadn't noticed before, and thinking about what it truly meant to move on. Grief and anger were still there, but now they were tempered with a new sense of clarity. I started small, reclaiming little parts of my life that had been lost. I painted my bedroom a soft, hopeful shade of blue, the kind my mother had always loved. I planted flowers in pots outside the apartment window, feeling the dirt crumble between my fingers and taking comfort in its permanence, its grounding nature. Each small act was a declaration: I was still here. I still mattered. I could still create beauty, even from the wreckage. One afternoon, I decided to confront the parts of my life that had been most intimate to them. I went to the old house, not to reclaim it, for legally it no longer belonged to me, but to face the ghosts within its walls. Standing at the front door, I could almost hear echoes of laughter, the clink of coffee cups, the casual banter of family mornings. I let myself walk through each room mentally, acknowledging the memories without allowing them to control me. The house had been a vessel of betrayal, but I could carry its lessons with me without being imprisoned by its walls. Friends became my lifeline. I invited them over, not to commiserate endlessly about the betrayal, but to rebuild the social fabric that had frayed during my marriage. We cooked together, shared stories, and laughed, sometimes for the first time in months. The simple act of connection, of being seen and heard, began to fill the void left by deceit. It reminded me that life was not over, that trust could still be built, and that I was capable of joy despite the wounds I carried. Then came the moments of quiet reflection, late nights when the apartment was still, and I could finally let my thoughts wander without distraction. I thought of my mother, her letter, and the way her words had been twisted. I realized that forgiveness was not a gift for them, but a lifeline for me. To release the weight of their choices, to accept that the betrayal was theirs, not mine, was a radical act of self-preservation. I didn't need to condone their actions, but I did need to let go of the bitterness that threatened to corrode me from within. With time, I began to write letters, not to send, but to organize my thoughts and emotions. I wrote to David, to Clara, even to my younger self. "You are stronger than you know," one line read. Another, "You deserve honesty, respect, and a life of your own making." These letters became a mirror, reflecting back the person I was becoming, someone who had survived unimaginable betrayal, who had faced it with clarity and dignity, and who was now actively choosing a path toward healing. One day, a message arrived from an old colleague. "I saw what happened," it said simply. "You handled it with strength. I hope you're okay." For the first time, I realized that others had noticed my courage, had witnessed my dignity amidst chaos. That recognition, small as it seemed, felt like validation. It reminded me that life was not defined solely by the betrayals we endure, but by the resilience we cultivate in response. I started volunteering at a local community center, helping others who had faced personal crises. Sharing my story cautiously, listening to theirs, offering guidance when I could, I found a new sense of purpose. The act of giving back, of turning pain into support for others, was transformative. It reminded me that the world was still full of people capable of kindness, honesty, and love, the things I had thought lost forever. And then, unexpectedly, peace arrived in small, quiet ways. A walk through the park, sunlight hitting my face just right. A cup of tea in the morning, steam curling lazily into the air. The sound of laughter from a neighbor's children echoing down the street. These moments were subtle, almost imperceptible, but they accumulated, forming a mosaic of healing. I began to feel at home within myself, a place unshakable by betrayal or loss. Evenings became reflective rituals. I would sit by the window, journal in hand, tea cooling beside me, and allow myself to process the day. Sometimes I would write about the past, sometimes about the future. Each line, each memory, each acknowledgement of pain and growth reinforced a truth I had learned through the wreckage: the past may shape us, but it does not define the entirety of our lives. The choices of others may wound us, but they cannot dictate our healing. There were still moments of sadness, sudden pangs of memory that would arrive unbidden. But I met them differently now, not with denial, not with self-pity, but with quiet acknowledgement. I would take a deep breath, feel the ache, and then remind myself, I am still here. I am still capable of love, joy, and trust. I am reclaiming my life, not because they wronged me, but because I owe it to myself to thrive. Months passed, and the initial storm of legal battles and social confrontation began to settle. The house had been settled in court, the sale reversed in part, though I ultimately chose not to return. It had become too much of a symbol of betrayal, too heavy with memories that would always echo with deceit. Instead, I found a small townhouse not far from the city, modest, but entirely mine. The keys felt heavy in my hand, not with debt or obligation, but with freedom. I had chosen this life for myself, and that choice felt sacred. David and Clara faded from my daily consciousness, though their presence lingered in the margins of memory. I wasn't obsessed with revenge anymore. The thrill of retribution had been replaced with something deeper, dignity. I had seen the consequences they faced, the social isolation, the whispered conversations among mutual friends, the professional challenges, and though I didn't gloat, I recognized that accountability had a way of finding its mark. It wasn't about punishment. It was about the natural reckoning that comes when actions violate trust so fundamentally. The healing process wasn't linear. Some nights, I would wake up with a start, the memory of that first day back home, the paper in my hands, the laughter I couldn't escape, pressing on my chest. But I began to meet those moments differently. I would sit up, breathe deeply, and remind myself that I had survived. That the betrayal, as piercing as it had been, had not destroyed me. I was still here, still capable of love, still deserving of happiness. I discovered joy in the mundane. Mornings spent sipping tea on the balcony, the scent of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, the quiet rhythm of life uninterrupted by manipulation. I started cooking again, experimenting with flavors I had once ignored in my rush through life. The act of creating something tangible, nourishing, became a meditation, a way to reconnect with myself. Each meal, each simple pleasure, was a reminder that life could be gentle, even after heartbreak. One evening, while tending the small garden I had planted outside my new home, a neighbor approached me. She was elderly, sprightly despite the cane she leaned on. "You've done well," she said softly. "I've seen the way you've carried yourself. You're strong." I nodded, unsure of how to respond at first. Compliments had always felt strange, almost unearned, but in this moment, they landed differently. They weren't about vanity, they were about recognition that strength isn't loud or boastful, but steady and enduring. I thought about forgiveness often. Not the easy, fleeting kind, but the deliberate, conscious decision to release anger without excusing wrongdoing. I wrote letters, not to send, but to let go. To Clara, to David, to myself, even to my mother, whose words had been used against me in ways she could not have foreseen. Each letter was a step toward inner peace, a reclamation of narrative. I realized that forgiveness was a gift I gave to myself, a key to unlock the door that had trapped me in grief. One afternoon, I found an old photo album tucked away in a drawer I had neglected. I flipped through the pages, seeing faces smiling, moments captured in innocence and love. My mother, David, Clara, and I, unaware then of the fracture that would later emerge. I lingered on each image, not with longing, but with understanding. Those moments were real once. They didn't have to define the future, but they belonged to my story. I could honor the good without being shackled to the bad. Friends became central to my healing. I spent time cultivating relationships that nourished me, friendships that had been neglected in the whirlwind of family drama and betrayal. We shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments. I realized that family isn't just those who share blood, it's the people who choose to stand by you, who celebrate your victories and soothe your wounds. In investing in these relationships, I found a network of trust and love that was entirely within my control. Work, too, became a source of renewal. I poured myself into projects that mattered, taking pride in accomplishments untainted by deceit or manipulation. The satisfaction of creating, of contributing meaningfully, was a balm for wounds that words could not touch. It reminded me that life's value isn't measured solely by relationships, but also by the integrity with which we live and the effort we put into shaping our own paths. And slowly, imperceptibly at first, I began to smile again. Not the hollow smile that masks pain, but the genuine, quiet contentment that rises from knowing you've endured and emerged intact. It was fragile, like a seedling after a storm, but it grew steadily, nourished by self-respect, clarity, and the conscious choice to embrace life fully. Each morning felt like an opportunity, not a reminder of loss. Each interaction, each small pleasure, was a testament to the resilience I had cultivated. I thought often about the phrase my mother had used in her letter, the one that had been weaponized against me: "Promise me you'll forgive, even if it breaks your heart." I understood it differently now. Forgiveness wasn't about enabling betrayal or excusing. Promise me you'll forgive, even if it breaks your heart. He deserves happiness. Her words had been meant to guide me through life, to instill compassion, but they had been twisted into justification. My sister had used my mother's voice to cloak her own desire and righteousness. The room blurred, the sound of their breathing, the light filtering through the blinds, even the hum of the refrigerator, all of it pressed in on me. I felt hollow, betrayed, shattered in ways I hadn't known were possible. I thought of the years we had built together, the laughter, the shared cups of coffee, the quiet evenings in front of the television. And now, all of it felt like a lie. My body ached, not from the surgery, but from the weight of reality pressing down on me. The people I had trusted most, the blood I had loved, had turned against me in ways so intimate it left no space to hide from the truth. I don't remember exactly when I stood up, the letter still clutched in one hand, my vision blurred from tears. But I did. I walked over to the window, looking out at the street I had once walked proudly, the mailbox I had painted myself, the garden I had tended lovingly. It wasn't mine anymore. They had taken it from me, not just the house, but the life I thought I had. And yet, somewhere deep in the ache, a small, defiant spark remained. This wasn't the end. I wouldn't let it be. Not completely. By the time the first anniversary of my mother's passing approached, I felt an odd mixture of sorrow and peace. I had learned to navigate the days without David and Clara in my life, but certain dates, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, still carried sharp reminders of what had been lost. I wasn't naive, I knew those wounds might never fully disappear. But I had also discovered that life could be reshaped, that joy could coexist with grief, and that strength could rise from the ashes of betrayal. I decided to honor my mother's memory in a way that felt true to me, not as a justification for someone else's choices. I planted a small rose garden in my backyard, the soil rich and dark under my fingers. Each bloom I nurtured felt like a quiet rebellion against the pain that had once threatened to overwhelm me. It was an act of creation, of reclaiming life, beauty, and purpose. My mother's gentle encouragement lingered in my mind, not the manipulation that had come through Clara, but the love and wisdom she had always tried to instill. A neighbor came by that afternoon. "They're beautiful," she said, gesturing to the roses. I smiled faintly. "They're my way of remembering her, and of moving forward." She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, I felt connected not just to the garden, but to the life I was building around it. It was a life I controlled, a narrative I had the power to write. Work and volunteering had also given me a sense of renewal. At the community center, I had started a small support group for women who had experienced betrayal or loss. Sharing my story was difficult at first, vulnerability is never easy. But as women opened up about their struggles, as tears were shed and laughter returned to faces worn with grief, I realized that my pain had purpose. My experience, harrowing as it had been, could guide others toward healing. Each session reinforced a simple truth: resilience is built in moments of courage, often quiet and unseen, yet profoundly transformative. I also began reconnecting with old friends, the ones I had drifted away from during the chaos of my marriage. We cooked together, shared long conversations over coffee, and sometimes simply sat in silence, enjoying the comfort of presence without obligation. In these moments, I was reminded that life is built as much from connection as it is from survival. Trust, once broken, could be cautiously rebuilt, and support could take the place of betrayal if one was willing to accept it. Then, unexpectedly, David reached out again, months after the fallout, after the legal consequences, after the social and financial reckoning. His message was hesitant, almost formal. "I hope you're well. I wanted to apologize again. I understand if you never want to hear from me." For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of the old anger, the raw, primal sense of betrayal that had haunted me. But it was different now. That anger no longer controlled me. I could feel it without being consumed by it. I typed a response carefully, deliberately, acknowledging his words without reopening wounds. "I am doing well," I wrote. "I've learned a lot, and I continue to rebuild my life. I hope you can do the same." I hit send, and then I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not from him, not from Clara, not even from the memories that haunted the corners of my mind, but relief from carrying the burden of resentment. I had allowed closure to come on my own terms. As spring arrived, my garden flourished, the roses bright against the backdrop of my modest townhouse. I spent mornings sipping tea outside, feeling the sun warm my shoulders, listening to the birds and the hum of the city beyond. These small, ordinary joys, once taken for granted, became sacred. They reminded me that life, even after profound betrayal, could offer moments of peace, beauty, and satisfaction. I also found love again, though cautiously. Not the consuming, all-or-nothing love that had blinded me before, but a gentle, patient connection with someone who respected boundaries and honored honesty. It wasn't a replacement for what I had lost, nor did it erase the pain, but it was a reminder that the heart is capable of hope, of renewal, of trust rebuilt slowly, brick by brick. One evening, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea, a notebook on my lap, and the faint scent of roses drifting in from the balcony. I reflected on everything: the betrayal, the loss, the legal battles, the moments of quiet despair, and the small victories of self-discovery. I thought about my mother, her intentions, her dying wish, and how it had been manipulated. And I thought about myself, the woman who had survived, who had reclaimed her life, who had found dignity and strength in the midst of heartbreak. I realized something profound: healing is not a destination. It is a series of moments, small and deliberate, in which we choose ourselves over the pain others have inflicted. It is sitting with grief without letting it define you. It is recognizing betrayal without being consumed by bitterness. It is planting roses after storms, literally and metaphorically, and letting life grow again. That night, as I closed the notebook and sipped the last of my tea, I felt a quiet sense of triumph. Not over David, not over Clara, not over the circumstances, but over the internal darkness that had threatened to swallow me. I had emerged intact, whole in my own right, capable of joy, of love, of peace. And in that, I found a measure of freedom no one could ever take away. Months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt both comforting and empowering. I no longer measured my days by the absence of David or Clara, but by the presence of what I could nurture: my home, my friendships, my own sense of self. The townhouse, modest as it was, had become a sanctuary. I painted, I cooked, I gardened, I laughed again. Each act, ordinary and unremarkable to an outsider, carried immense meaning. I was reclaiming my life on my own terms. One Sunday morning, I received a call from my mother's closest friend, Mrs. Levin. Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of warmth and caution. "I wanted you to know," she said, "that your mother spoke often of you in her final days. She trusted you to live your life fully, even if circumstances were hard. She knew you'd find strength." I held the phone close, letting the words sink in. My mother's voice, long silent in this world, was alive again, not as a source of pain, but as guidance and reassurance. Her dying wish, once manipulated, had been restored in spirit through my choices. I began to understand that the betrayal, while devastating, had also been a catalyst. It forced me to examine the people in my life, the boundaries I had set, and the values I truly held. I realized how much I had tolerated, how much I had allowed others' decisions to dictate my happiness. That understanding became the cornerstone of my healing. I no longer needed to control others, I only needed to maintain integrity in my own actions and choices. As spring turned to summer, I invited friends over more often. We shared meals, stories, and laughter late into the evenings. One night, as the sunset painted the sky in gold and rose, a friend commented on how radiant I looked. "It's like you've finally come back to yourself," she said. I smiled quietly, recognizing the truth in her words. I had returned, not to the person I was before betrayal, but to a stronger, more grounded version of myself. The pain had left its mark, yes, but it had also shaped resilience, clarity, and dignity. Occasionally, I would hear whispers about David and Clara from mutual acquaintances. They were struggling socially and professionally, facing judgment and isolation from the community. I didn't gloat, their suffering was not my triumph. But I allowed myself a quiet acknowledgement of justice. The truth had a way of asserting itself, and integrity, once maintained in the face of betrayal, speaks louder than any vengeance. One afternoon, while tending my roses, I noticed a young woman struggling with a heavy box outside. Something about her demeanor, the anxious way she looked around, reminded me of myself not long ago. Without thinking, I went out to help. We carried the box together, chatting lightly, and I felt that subtle warmth that comes from connecting, from offering assistance without expectation. It was a reminder that life's rewards often come in small, unremarkable moments, moments that rebuild trust, kindness, and hope. I also began volunteering more actively at the community center. I facilitated workshops on resilience, boundary setting, and self-respect for women who had faced betrayal or personal loss. Sharing my story, cautiously and thoughtfully, I noticed eyes widen in recognition, tears glisten, and shoulders relax with the comfort of knowing they weren't alone. It was humbling, yet empowering. I realized that even in the darkest moments of life, there is an opportunity to guide, to heal, and to restore dignity, both for oneself and for others. One evening, I sat on my balcony with a notebook in my lap, jotting reflections. The scent of roses mingled with the faint aroma of dinner from the kitchen. I wrote, "Strength isn't born in calm seas. It is forged in storms, in betrayal, in moments when the world seems determined to break you. And yet, in surviving, in choosing integrity over rage, we find the power to rebuild our lives, brick by brick." The pen felt steady in my hand. The words were true. They were mine. A quiet night came, and I reflected on the year that had passed. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the deep sadness that had once seemed insurmountable. And yet, I also thought about growth, resilience, and the beauty of reclaimed life. I had transformed grief into purpose, betrayal into clarity, and loss into a foundation for self-respect. Life was not perfect, and scars remained, but they were reminders of my strength, not my failure. I realized, finally, that my story was no longer defined by others' actions, by the treachery of David and Clara, or by the twisted use of my mother's wishes. It was defined by my choices, how I responded, how I healed, how I nurtured myself and others around me. And in that, I found freedom. Freedom to live, to love, to trust, and to hope once more. The next few months were a quiet symphony of routine and discovery. I found joy in small things, the way morning sunlight spilled across the floor, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery downstairs, the gentle hum of life beyond my apartment. I became attuned to the subtleties of peace, realizing that after chaos, even the simplest moments could feel profound. I no longer measured my days by absence or loss, I measured them by presence, by conscious awareness of my own resilience. One day, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from my mother's lawyer, someone I hadn't heard from since the early weeks after her passing. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if it would stir old wounds or offer closure. Inside was a note, hand-signed, reminding me of my mother's intentions, to live fully, to honor myself, and to carry forward with integrity. There was no hidden obligation, no manipulation, only affirmation. Tears blurred my vision as I read and reread the words. It felt like my mother had finally entrusted me with her spirit in a way that could not be misused, a quiet, enduring blessing. Work and volunteer life continued to anchor me. At the community center, I began mentoring younger women, those navigating difficult relationships or family pressures. I shared my story with caution but with honesty, emphasizing lessons learned rather than details meant to shame others. The response was remarkable, conversation sparked, gratitude flowed, and I realized that pain, when harnessed thoughtfully, could become a bridge to help others. Each session reinforced the lesson that surviving betrayal is not enough, thriving afterward is a choice. One evening, I invited a small group of friends over for dinner. We laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together without drama or expectation. As I watched the sunlight catch the edges of their smiles, I reflected on how far I had come. I remembered the hospital bed, the shock of betrayal, the hollow apartment, and the quiet resolve that had started to grow in me like a fragile flame. That flame had grown into steady light, illuminating a life I had feared might be lost entirely. Occasionally, I would hear whispers of David and Clara from mutual acquaintances. They were struggling to rebuild their own lives, facing judgment and isolation. But I felt no desire to engage. My victory was not in watching them suffer, it was in reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my ability to trust myself again. I realized that true empowerment is internal, not dependent on external validation or revenge. It is the quiet certainty that you are enough, that your choices matter, and that integrity carries its own reward. One quiet Sunday, I wandered through the local park, letting the sounds of children laughing and birds singing wash over me. I passed a young woman sitting alone on a bench, tears glistening on her cheeks. Something in her posture reminded me of myself months ago, lost, overwhelmed, uncertain. Without hesitation, I approached, offering a gentle, "Are you okay?" She looked up, startled at first, then nodded faintly. We spoke, first in fragments, then in longer sentences. By the end, she smiled, a small, tentative lift at the corners of her mouth. I felt a surge of warmth, the profound reminder that life's meaning is often found in helping others navigate the storms we have survived. In the evenings, I would sit on my balcony, notebook in hand, watching the city lights twinkle as dusk fell. I wrote about my experiences, the lessons learned, and the growth achieved. Strength is not about controlling others, I wrote one night. It is about controlling ourselves. About choosing clarity over chaos, dignity over bitterness, and love over resentment. The words resonated in a way that they never had before. Writing had become both therapy and testament, a reminder that my narrative was mine alone to shape. Spring turned to summer, and my life continued to evolve with gentle rhythm. I began to explore new hobbies, painting, photography, and even hiking. Each activity offered perspective, a sense of control, and a reconnection to the natural world I had neglected during years of trust and betrayal. I discovered that rebuilding life is not just about recovering what was lost, but about discovering what was waiting for us beyond the pain. And then came an unexpected message from a former friend of Clara's, a woman who had witnessed some of the betrayal but had been caught in the middle. She reached out quietly, almost apologetically. "I just wanted you to know," she wrote, "I saw how you handled everything. You were remarkable. I hope you are finding peace." I smiled softly. Recognition, even from someone tangential to the pain, reinforced a subtle truth: the way we navigate betrayal leaves a lasting impression. Dignity, patience, and resilience resonate far beyond the immediate circle of conflict. Through it all, I learned that peace is cultivated in fragments, in moments small and quiet. The betrayal I had endured did not vanish, nor did the scars disappear. But I could walk forward, unburdened, carrying lessons without letting them harden my heart. I could experience joy, build trust, and embrace love again, slowly, cautiously, deliberately. Life was not perfect, but it was mine, reclaimed and rebuilt. By late summer, I had fully settled into the rhythm of my new life. The townhouse had become a sanctuary, a space where every corner reflected choices I had made consciously. The walls, painted in soft, calming tones, were decorated with photographs of moments I had intentionally created: friends laughing, small trips to the park, the rose garden thriving in the sunlight. Each item, each memory, was a quiet declaration: I was no longer defined by betrayal, but by resilience. One afternoon, as I watered my roses, my phone buzzed with a message from an old neighbor. "I just wanted to check in," she wrote. You've inspired a few of us with the way you've handled everything. Truly remarkable. I paused, fingers wet with soil, and let the words sink in. Inspiration. I had never thought of myself that way before. Once, I had been a victim, shocked, broken, unsure of how to navigate a life upended. But now, through patience, reflection, and deliberate choices, I realized that others had witnessed the strength I had cultivated quietly, without show or vengeance. As autumn approached, I began to explore opportunities for personal growth beyond my immediate environment. I enrolled in a writing workshop, eager to channel experiences into narrative form. Writing had become my refuge, an honest space where I could reflect, dissect, and process life's complexities. My first assignment involved a short essay on betrayal and resilience. As I wrote, I realized how much I had learned, not just about trust or deceit, but about human nature, morality, and the strength required to rebuild one's life with integrity intact. One Saturday, I met with a group of women from my volunteer sessions. We gathered in a small cafe, sharing tea, stories, and strategies for navigating personal crises. One woman, in her mid-30s, shared a story of her husband leaving her unexpectedly, leaving her in financial and emotional turmoil. I listened, nodding, feeling a wave of empathy that was tempered by my own experience. When she finished, I shared, gently, some of my journey, the hospital, the betrayal, the legal battles, the reclaiming of my life. I spoke not to impress, but to empower. By the end, she smiled, her posture lighter. "Thank you," she said. "I can feel strength growing inside me already." That simple acknowledgement reinforced a profound truth: the impact of survival extends far beyond oneself. Life, I realized, was a balance of creation and reflection. I took long walks in the park, sometimes journaling, sometimes simply absorbing the sounds, the laughter of children, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of traffic. Each step, each breath, became an affirmation that I was present, grounded, and capable of embracing the ordinary beauty of life. I had survived extraordinary pain, but now I sought contentment in the everyday, in the tangible and gentle moments that often go unnoticed. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and amber, I received an unexpected letter from my mother's estate lawyer. It contained a small note she had left for me, written years before her passing but never shared. In it, she spoke of trust, forgiveness, and the importance of living authentically, regardless of others' choices. I held the note to my chest, feeling a warmth I hadn't expected. Her guidance, once weaponized, was now restored to its true purpose, a reminder that even in moments of deep pain, the principles of integrity and compassion can guide us forward. The months turned into a year. My life, once fractured, had begun to coalesce into something whole. I still thought of David and Clara occasionally, but no longer with anger or obsession. Their absence no longer represented loss but liberation, a clearing of space in which I could thrive. I realized that what I had lost in deceit, I had regained in clarity, self-respect, and intentional living. One day, while tending to my rose garden, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the betrayal itself, certainly, but for the lessons it forced me to learn. Gratitude for the clarity, for the friendships rebuilt, for the strength that had been uncovered, and for the ability to live each day with intention. I understood that happiness and peace were not rewards for enduring suffering, but results of deliberate choices to reclaim life, moment by moment. As winter approached, I began preparing for the holidays with a quiet, intentional spirit. There were no elaborate parties, no gestures meant to impress, only warmth and connection with those who had stood by me. I invited friends, neighbors, and women from my support group. We shared meals, stories, and laughter. In those simple gatherings, I felt the culmination of my journey, the realization that life could be rebuilt not through confrontation or revenge, but through integrity, resilience, and community. And through it all, I never lost sight of the lessons my mother had intended for me. She had wanted me to forgive, not for the sake of those who had wronged me, but for my own peace. She had wanted me to honor my heart, even in the face of betrayal. She had wanted me to live fully, with courage and dignity. In embracing those lessons, I had reclaimed not only my life, but the very essence of who I was meant to be. The first winter after everything had passed was quiet, almost meditative. Snow fell gently outside my townhouse, dusting the garden and rooftops in soft white. I sipped tea by the window, listening to the muffled footsteps of neighbors and the occasional laugh carried by the crisp air. The city seemed slower, calmer, and for the first time, so did I. There was no rush, no constant ache in my chest, no shadow of betrayal pressing against my life. There was only the quiet satisfaction of survival, growth, and self-possession. The holiday season arrived, and I prepared my small home for a gathering. Friends, neighbors, and women from my volunteer group would come together, not to celebrate drama or gossip, but to share warmth, stories, and laughter. I baked pies and bread, hung lights delicately across the windows, and arranged flowers in vases that reflected soft candlelight. Each small preparation felt symbolic. I was nurturing a life of my own making, choosing beauty, connection, and joy over the darkness that had once consumed me. On the day of the gathering, laughter filled the rooms. I watched people talk, share memories, and support one another, and a deep sense of fulfillment settled in me. In these moments, I understood the true power of my journey. I had survived betrayal, endured humiliation, and reclaimed life, and now I was using that survival to strengthen others. The emotional scars remained, but they were no longer chains. They were reminders of lessons learned, resilience forged, and compassion deepened. Later that evening, as the group dispersed and the apartment quieted, I sat alone with my journal. I wrote about everything: pain, growth, clarity, and love. I wrote about David and Clara, not with bitterness, but with acknowledgement. They had been part of my story, but not the authors of its conclusion. The story's ending belonged to me. My mother's wish, once twisted, was finally honored, not because I forgave blindly, but because I chose peace and self-respect. A knock at the door startled me. It was a neighbor, a woman I had grown close to over the months. She handed me a small envelope, simply saying, "Thought you might like this." Inside was a hand-painted card with a simple message: "Your courage inspires more than you know." Tears pricked my eyes, not for sorrow, but for the quiet affirmation that life had returned, not as a shadow of betrayal, but as something beautiful, grounded, and true. I reflected on the journey from that first shocking day back from surgery, the hospital, the betrayal, the sold house, and the spiraling uncertainty of life as I had known it. Every step had been difficult, the moments of despair, the sleepless nights, the internal battles of anger and grief. But I had moved forward. Slowly, deliberately, with dignity. Each choice had built the path that led to this evening, quiet, reflective, and full of the subtle joy of reclaimed life. I thought about the moral of the story, because every experience, every betrayal, carries one. I realized that life does not always give us the endings we expect. People may fail us, choices may harm us, and loved ones may betray us. But the ultimate lesson is that power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering ourselves. In choosing integrity over spite, resilience over despair, and love over bitterness, we reclaim our story. The narrative of our lives belongs not to those who hurt us, but to those who survive and thrive despite it. The snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the city in quiet. I closed my journal and looked around my home. Everything felt grounded: the rose garden outside, the warmth of the apartment, the scent of bread lingering in the air. I was living fully, with intention, with awareness, and with compassion. I had been broken, yes, but I had been rebuilt, not perfectly, but authentically, powerfully, and resiliently. That night, I sent a quiet thought into the world: forgiveness is not weakness, it is liberation. Strength is not vengeance, it is dignity. Life is not measured by what is taken from us, but by what we choose to build in the aftermath. I had reclaimed my home, my heart, and my narrative. And in that reclamation, I found freedom, peace, and hope. So now I ask you, the listener, when faced with betrayal, when confronted with loss and deception, how do you reclaim your life? Would you choose to let bitterness consume you, or could you, like I did, allow healing, reflection, and courage to guide your path forward? If this story resonated with you, consider sharing your thoughts, your experiences, or your reflections in the comments. Let's create a space where survival, resilience, and hope are celebrated, because even after the deepest betrayal, life can be reclaimed, and hearts can heal.